Our latest card release in Madam Web is here. A 2-1 with the ongoing effect, you can move one of your other cards away from here each turn. I spent most of the first day playing with Madam Web inside of traditional movement decks, and so far she's been rather impressive in these for me. I think she actively solves two problems the move deck has always had. The first is that she makes your sequencing on the order you draw and play your movement cards and your payoffs less strict. What I mean by this is if you play something like Human Torch first and then Madam Web second, you're still going to get to move your Human Torch and make it larger. Likewise, if you play your Madam Web first and then follow it up with a move payment like Torch or Vulture, you still get to leverage that effect all the same. The second thing that Madam Web does really well for these decks is mitigate a good amount of the location variance they've always experienced. She allows you to move cards into hard to reach places like Dark Dimension or Sanctum Sanctorum that you would otherwise be locked out of with a lot of your other movement enablers such as Ghost Spider. Past these two things, the other thing Madam Web does that's quite powerful is be a recurring movement enabler for your cards. You're not just one and done like other cards like Iron Fist and Ghost Spider. You can play out multiple cards into her path or move multiple cards into them and move them back off with precision on where they end up after the fact, letting her enable multiple of your move payoffs over the course of the game. She's also felt like she's finally allowed Hercules to really shine since he has a 50% chance to bat whatever you're moving into his lane back into the Madam Web path, allowing you to do it all over again the following turn. The first deck list I'm excited to dive into with Madam Web is this bounce move variation, which you can see in action right now on my daily deck highlights channel, linked in the video description down below. After playing with this deck for over an hour, I think there's a very real chance that a shell like this one is in large part to blame for the fact that not only Taskmaster was nerfed in our last OTA, but also Beast as well. This deck can put up incredibly impressive stat lines, triple digit power Human Torches that you then copy with Taskmaster. This deck, when played right, could also be incredibly difficult to interact with. You time your Falcons and your Beasts in a very appropriate way. You have your power hidden back in your hand going into the final turn of the game without priority, and you deploy those cards out in one big final swoop in a way that your opponent never really has a chance to interface with. This does require thinking and carefully managing your priority, but these move decks have always done that. Hercules really felt like a standout card in this archetype between Madam Web, letting you consistently trigger him every turn, and him batting things back into Madam Web. It really feels like she might be the final addition to the game to potentially allow Hercules to finally be a real Marvel Snap card. The core of this list felt really solid. I would say Madam Web, Hercules, and Ghost Spider are the must-have higher series cards to allow it to function at outputting those big numbers at a consistent rate. Nico Minaru and Nocturne can probably be substituted out for other utility cards that can help you out in different spots. Nico could be another one energy card such as Iceman or Silver Sable, and I think Nocturne could be some type of tech card such as Kyera or Armor that can give you counterplay into your opponent's counterplay. A non-bounce direction Madam Web can allow us to move in is a focus around Living Tribunal with Iron Man as a kicker to boost our giant move payoffs to as large as they can possibly be. An absolutely perfect nut straw for this deck is Human Torch on turn 1, Madam Web on turn 2, Mystique Madam Web on turn 3 and move the Human Torch into its path, then Hercules on turn 4, so we can then start ping-ponging the Human Torch into the Hercules path to bounce it back into a guaranteed other Madam Web path to then close out on Iron Man on turn 5, Living Tribunal on turn 6 to double up our Human Torch one additional time and then blow its massive stat line across the entire board. While that's obviously not going to happen with an incredible amount of frequency, I was really impressed with the flexibility and consistency that this deck made massive numbers for Living Tribunal to divide up, even Dagger, and Vulture regularly hit 20 or 30 plus points of power, which when doubled by Iron Man and split by Living Tribunal, regular creates game-winning board states. Mystique is not just a one-trick pony in this deck. In addition to copying Madam Web to supercharge our movers around the board, she could also serve as a backup copy of Iron Man, letting us win the game by going tall into individual lanes when Living Tribunal ends up buried in our deck. Unfortunately, most of the higher series cards in this deck aren't optional, with Nico really being the only one that you can replace without losing a core part of what the deck is trying to accomplish. Our last few Madam Web deck ideas today are less all in on the move strategy and are looking to leverage her utility in a few different ways. Our first here is an Elsa Bloodstone focused deck. Madam Web can kind of set us up with an Elsa path where we can play a card in, get that Elsa bonus, and then move it out to get that bonus repeated again the following turn. Madam Web can also serve as a wonderful enabler for Kraven. And another thing that came up a lot in the Tribunal list I looked at previously that can be quite powerful here as well is Iron Man into a Madam Web path on turn 5 is actually quite powerful. It lets you threaten that double all my stats effect across every lane of the board, which when paired with other effects like Captain Marvel make it an absolute nightmare for your opponent to figure out exactly how many stats you're going to have and where on that final turn of the game. Past the access that Madam Web adds to this deck list, it also just that Kitty Pryde, Angela, Elsa, Hope Summers core that we've seen in a variety of places over Marvel Snap's history that's been consistently powerful at pumping out numbers. Up next, we have a fun idea on a Madam Web control variation. So obviously we have a couple of traditional move payoffs such as Vulture, and everybody knows Marvel Snap's All-Star in Spider-Man 2099. But past that, we also have effects like Cosmo and Echo, which can be extra deadly and mind gamey for the opponent when you put them into Madam Web's lane, effectively allowing them to exist simultaneously at all 3 lanes on the board every single turn. You mix in a dash of Storm, closing off one of the lanes the opponent could otherwise be playing to, and this deck list has a ton of opportunity to be outplaying whatever your opponent is doing by moving your tech cards around at absolutely crucial moments of the game. The last deck idea I wanted to talk about today is a Madam Web powered variation of the Bast Spice Rack shell that I've featured a few times between my channels. This deck list essentially has a bunch of low to the ground cards that Bast all powers up, with Elsa Bloodstone being one of the headlining features, with Madam Web letting us power up cards in her lane again and again and again. One of the things I'm really interested in trying out in this particular shell is seeing exactly how few move enablers we can get away with while Dagger still feels playable. In this particular list, in addition to Madam Web, we have Grapple Arrow 50% of the time from Kate Bishop, as well as Nico Minaru's movement effect that's going to slide Dagger to the right on occasion. While it's still early, there definitely isn't a question in my mind that Madam Web will be a move deck staple moving forward. The one kind of gray area that's not apparent from looking at the public metrics that we have or my own gameplay so far is whether or not she's going to earn herself a lasting spot in more fair decks that are looking to do things like Elsa or slide utility cards around like Cosmo in a kind of quirky shell game. As always, if you enjoyed my roundup today of decks and the review of this card, be sure to snap that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss my best decks roundup coming later this week, where we'll be able to take a data-driven look at which Madam Web decks are finding success in people's hands so far.